Hello and welcome to week 9 of ENVU 3150, Environmental Decision Making. This week we are going to center our discussion on passive models. We're going to look at the realm of what we call choice architecture, and we're going to look at feedback, goals, and commitment. Our topics this week are a comparison between active versus passive prescriptive models. We're going to review feedback. We're going to understand how goals work and understand how commitment works with an example. Our learning objectives this week are to be able to apply an appropriate decision strategy to an environmental issue, to articulate the values, beliefs, and principles that comprise a personal environmental philosophy, and to justify an environmental decision outcome using rational, legal, and ethical criteria. We're going to begin this week by talking a little bit about active versus passive prescriptive models. Again, we're dealing with prescriptive models, which are methods to help people make better environmental decisions, and by using methods to minimize bias in the use of heuristics. So what we want to do is to make a decision using a method that acknowledges that bias exists and people tend to use heuristics, but that bypasses those heuristics and minimizes the effects of bias. The different types of decisions require different approaches, and the first decision that every decision maker needs to make in terms of where to go is we need to decide how to decide. And this is one of the most important decisions for any environmental issue, is the selection of an appropriate prescriptive decision process, active or passive. And anyone who designs the environment in which people make choices is known as a choice architect. Whether or not you are designing an environment for active decision methods or passive decision methods, you can be considered a choice architect if you are creating the structures within which decision makers will function. Active models are those that actively involve a variety of decision makers. In this class, we are going to study, or we have studied, the structured decision-making process. The active models are useful for high-stakes decisions that involve multiple stakeholders from various groups. These types of decisions will have multiple competing objectives that are not easily defined, and as part of the process they'll have to be easily defined completely. These decisions tend to be complex and take a long time to complete. They involve significant uncertainties along with significant impacts of those uncertainties. There's generally a large amount of information that needs to be processed, and these methods offer ways to integrate value judgments and technical specifications, quantitative and qualitative data, as well as emotional and logical information, because of the high level of involvement of individuals with these processes. Passive models, on the other hand, are much simpler, much more straightforward. And in this class, we're going to look at feedback, goals, commitment, and defaults. Passive models are appropriate for low-stakes decisions, decisions that are small, frequent, quick to complete, yes or no type decisions, or A or B. These decisions are made generally at the individual level. Your objectives are clearly defined. The consequences, however, of these decisions may not be readily apparent, and many people will tend to make these decisions when they're hungry, tired, or distracted. So we can see two different sets of conditions, and the first job of the choice architect is to look at the sets of conditions surrounding the decision and then decide which model is appropriate. Active models are useful in many situations, especially in government or large projects. They break decisions into manageable steps because these decisions can seem overwhelming at first, but they are taken one bit at a time or one chunk at a time. They Active models avoid or minimize the effects of heuristics and bias. They involve people to directly address consequences and trade-offs. They help people to define exactly what the meaningful consequences are, and they involve them in trade-offs so that they don't feel like their viewpoint was not respected. And the active models can include ill-defined objectives because part of the process is to refine those and get good, solid definitions. And again, they include subjective values, individual values, and so you get a lot of involvement from a variety of individuals, so that you can include a number of different viewpoints in the final decision outcome. The active models really are time-consuming, though, and they can take from weeks to months to sometimes even years. They're not suitable for everyday decisions. They do require expertise in research, information gathering and analysis, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of information, different types of information, quantitative information, qualitative information. You're going to be dealing with the emotional states of individuals. And they require that the choice architect understand the structured decision-making process, and that objectives can be defined accurately, precisely, and completely. And these disadvantages, though, can be overcome by someone who's been trained in this process. The active models are good for groups and teams and for large-scale projects because they really do function best when you get a lot of involvement of stakeholders from various backgrounds, and you can bring people together to get buy-in, because as the process continues, buy-in and commitment increase. Passive models, on the other hand, also are taking advantage of known biases and common errors. However, they tend to be a little bit smaller in scope. Passive models are designed for individuals to help them make the right decision easier to complete. They're designed to provide immediate, meaningful feedback and make decision consequences more tangible, and in many cases to make hidden costs more visible. Some of the disadvantages of passive models, in fact the most significant one, is that they can be perceived as manipulative or coercive. So they really need to be deployed in a transparent manner. All the information around their development and the implications of making the decision need to be available to the decision maker. They should support social or environmental objectives to be seen as legitimate. And they really presuppose that you've got these objectives defined through an active decision process before you start looking at implementing a passive model, which means that you're going to have some advanced planning. In many cases, the long-term effects of making these decisions is still unknown. This is a relatively new field. And so we really don't have that much research showing how the long-term effects of these passive models plays out in different scenarios. There are some emerging studies. We're going to look at an example at the end of this presentation, but they are just now beginning to be developed by researchers. The advantages of passive models are that they are very good for individuals. They help with daily decisions, and there's a low degree of accuracy required because the accuracy is built into the decision process itself. It's built into the model itself, how the decision is made. So the decision maker, their cognitive load is pretty low, and so they don't have to deal with high degrees of accuracy. Here are some examples. Active decision making would be appropriate when a government or a community is considering building a dam, or a government is writing an environmental law. A community is being developed, for example, out of nothing. The houses are being built. The layout of the streets and the parks is being designed. Perhaps a town is constructing a waste handling facility, or a company is installing industrial manufacturing technology, or perhaps installing a new manufacturing facility. These are very complex decisions, lots of variables, many competing objectives, and so an active decision-making process such as structured decision-making would be appropriate. There are also many arenas in which passive decision making is highly appropriate rather than active decision making. Some of these examples would be choosing organic versus conventionally grown food, using electricity in the home, choosing what and when to recycle, making a commitment to a certain action, such as donating part of one's paycheck to a charity or buying home appliances. There are some decisions in which uh, the uh, uh, the the passive decision making does require an extensive active decision making prior to it. One example would be a more complex decision such as buying a house or buying a car. You would want to have at least some form of structured decision making around developing a set of objectives and consequences for that type of decision before you went out and bought a car. And then what you would do is you would use the feedback from the information on the car sticker as well as the research information to help you make the final decision. So all decisions aren't necessarily either active or either completely passive. Many passive decisions require an active decision-making process to some degree prior to implementing a passive decision architecture. Feedback is the basis of all performance improvement in all aspects of our lives, whether it's personal or organizational. This is how feedback works. Let's step through the process here. We have an action, and that action has a consequence. We receive feedback on that consequence as a result of our sensory systems, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, um, gustatory, and we make an assessment of that feedback around criteria we have placed that related to the consequence. In other words, what do we feel is important around that particular consequence? So we assess the consequence, good or bad, desirable, just something we want. And then we would revise our strategy around an action. We would say, okay, well, we can change the way we do things. We can leave things the same. When we say that we want to change our actions, we get a new action. Our new action then in turn has another consequence from which we will receive feedback and we make another assessment. And this process happens almost instantaneously, it can be very quick. And we generally get many iterations of this cycle until we get to a favorable situation in which our assessment is everything is okay, no new action is required. Let's take a look at an example, electricity use. Our typical feedback situation is let's say that we live in a hot climate like I do in the deserts in Arizona. We walk into a room. Our consequence of walking into the room is that we experience air temperature. That's our experience through our sensory systems. Our feedback is the temperature of the air. We make an assessment that the room is too hot. So we revise our strategy, which is that we need to make the room cooler, and we take a revised action, which is to turn on the air conditioning. The consequences are that the air is cooled, and then we get feedback on the temperature of the cooled air. However, this feedback does not allow us to really understand the environmental consequences of our decision. So an example of choice architecture is the use of smart meters, because good feedback makes long-term costs, especially long-term environmental costs, more visible. So the same scenario, we turn on the air conditioner, consequences of electricity use, we get a different form of feedback in addition to the cooler air. We can also see that how much electricity the air conditioner is using through our smart meter. We can go out and look at it, or maybe we have it transmitting to our iPad or to our smartphone or to a device in our living room. We make an assessment that a large amount of electricity is being used. So we revise our strategy. We need to reduce electricity usage because we don't want to increase or contribute to an increase in CO2 emissions. So our action is to raise the temperature setting on the air conditioner from, say 65 to say 75 degrees. The consequence of our action is that the air conditioner operates less. Our feedback then is the amount of electricity used again from the smart meter, and our assessment is we're using a lower amount of electricity, which is sufficient, and then we leave the thermostat on our current setting for our revised strategy, which is then acceptable. So this is an example of how actions, consequences, and feedback can be used in conjunction with choice architecture, where we can make a decision around the long-term or hidden costs of our actions in terms of the environment, and really ascertain what those costs are and relate our actions to those costs. In fact, that's been the primary problem with our actions, is that the costs of our actions in terms of the environment tend to be invisible. And one of the goals here of choice architecture is to make those costs more visible so people will make better decisions. Feedback should be real-time or recent data to be useful. Information has a very short half-life. Feedback should contain specific data points. So in the example of the smart meter, it's real-time, I think, within 3 or 4 minutes. The data points are the watts being used. The feedback should be convenient, easy to understand. The information from the smart meters is power in watts, and they should set a context. In other words, let the decision maker understand right from wrong. And this is a little tough to do with real-time data from smart meters, although at the end of the month, what many utilities do is to publish the use of electricity over the period of a month versus the use of electricity in comparable neighborhood houses, so you can see whether you are above or below the average usage. Examples are smart meters, as we've seen. Some automobiles have the miles per gallon dashboard indicators on a real-time basis. We can look at emissions levels in organizations for greenhouse gases and toxics, especially around chemical operations such as refineries and certain manufacturing operations, semiconductors. Recycling amounts and types. What are you recycling? This is a little less frequent. And we can even look at feedback around actions taken to implement pollution prevention. These would be more of a management reporting feedback. Goals are another form of passive decision models. They are part of a good choice architecture because they provide benchmarks against which individuals and organizations can measure progress. And goals enhance the effectiveness of feedback because it's tough to understand where we want to go. In other words, what's our assessment, what's our revised strategy, unless we have some meaningful goals that against which we can measure progress. Goals generally come in 3 types: reductions in undesirable behavior, such as miles driven, or amounts of electricity used; increases in desirable behavior, amounts recycled, or implementation of environmental management systems in a business; or dates to accomplish beneficial actions. So we have reductions, increases, and dates. The goals will generally have an indicator and a measure so that we know whether or not we're meeting them. And the idea in feedback is to center the feedback on goal attainment so that we know whether or not we are achieving a specific goal. And so the feedback cycle, 99% of them use goals. The goals are generally seen as socially legitimate. They're determined sometimes by an active decision process that has been carried out prior to implementing a passive model. And so they gain social legitimacy. Commitment is a third strategy that's used in passive models. And commitment attaches a social and or economic cost to an undesirable choice alternative or to an unwanted behavior. The cost can be a lack of social acceptance or a financial cost. And commitment generally has to be public to allow for the social conformity pressure to work as a reinforcement, actually as a stimulus to help the commitment be implemented more effectively. Now, on an individual basis, individuals can make commitments by signing a pledge to promote recycling or to make ongoing contributions to charity as regular paycheck deductions. Organizations can make commitments by publishing goals related to implementing recycling systems or publishing goals related to pollution reductions. Again, we have goals around a positive, an increase in desirable behavior, and then a reduction in undesirable behavior. One of the most interesting examples of commitment was a program that was implemented in the Philippines, the Green Bank of Caraga and Mindanao. This is the Committed Action to Reduce and End Smoking. And so what the bank did was implement a program in the city of Mindanao. Individuals wishing to quit would sign a contract. They would agree to make a minimum deposit of 50 pesos, $1.25 daily, which is what they would be spending on cigarettes. They established a lockbox they gave them to the CARES clients, but the clients would have no access to the money in the account for 6 months. This is not an interest-bearing account, but they would make deposits in their lockboxes, and weekly the bank would come out and collect the deposits and put them into the account. After 6 months, the participants had to pass a urine test in order to gain access to the money in the account. And if they had indicated that they were smoke-free, nicotine-free, and that they had successfully quit smoking, they would get all the money that they had been saving. If they failed the urine test, the money that they deposited was forfeited and then given to a charity. So there's a financial incentive here. And so the results are interesting. 83 out of 781 individuals offered the contract, signed it, and 29 out of 83 passed at 6 months. And of the 29 who passed at 6 months, 14 passed 12 months. 15 failed at 12 months. Of the 54 who failed at 6 months, 7 passed at 12 months. And so what we saw as a result of this is that 33 percentage points of the individuals are more likely to stop smoking than the control group. And so this shows you the power of making a commitment that has a financial cost, actually a financial incentive tied to it. So in conclusion, we can see that anyone who's involved in designing an environment in which people make choices is a choice architect. The people who designed the EPA stickers for the mileage stickers for automobiles, they are choice architects. The people who designed the reports for an organization indicating what actions they're going to take around the environment are choice architects. The people who designed the smart meters and who designed the devices that read the smart meters are choice architects. And choice architects can use both active and passive decision models because both models are appropriate in different situations. Active decision models generally require a high degree of involvement with the decision, and then they will generate decision maker buy-in to the eventual solution and result in a better overall understanding on the part of all the stakeholders. Passive decision models are simpler, however, they have to have social legitimacy in order to be perceived as not manipulative. And the key with both models is the integrity of the decision process. With our passive models, we want to have some form of legitimacy which can be generated by an active process prior to implementing a passive model. The overall integrity of the decision process is the basis, though, because even though we intend to have a certain consequence, as we've seen before, the consequence may be affected by unknown factors. So the goal here is to make the decision process as effective as possible so that it reduces the use of heuristics and reduces the effects of bias.